Alrighty. The message tonight that I'm going to share with you is why we settle for less. Why we settle for less. This past couple of weeks, God's been speaking in my life and dealing with me in some things and areas where I know that I've settled for less in places that He definitely had better for me, but I did not walk in that better or in that best that He had for me. I settled for the lesser in my life. So my question for you tonight is, why do you settle for less? Why do you settle for less in relationships? Why do you settle for less in opportunities? Why do you settle for less in desires? Why do you settle for less in the value of yourself? Why do you settle for less in your identity and in your destiny? Those are all places where we can settle for less, and all places that I want you to identify or examine this week as God leads you. But if you were to think about this question, how much of your life is how it is because you've settled for less? How much of your life is less than the best that God has for you? If you were to quantify that, what would it look like? You talking 10%? You talking 90%? Where are you at? How much of your life can you honestly say, when you look at your heart, when you look at your relationships, when you look at where you are in life, can you honestly say that you are living the best that God has for you? That's a hard question. In my life, I know that I can't always say I'm living the best or I have the best. But I have a desire for the best. And there's a lot of reasons why we settle for this lesser in the world. The lesser in relationships. The lesser in our destiny. Fear, shame. Maybe you're afraid to really go for all that you could go for. Maybe you're afraid to step out. Maybe you're afraid to walk in an area that God's called you to walk in. Maybe you have shame. Maybe you say you're not good enough. Maybe you say, man, my life is, I've just made too many mistakes. No one's ever going to listen to me. Maybe you're impatient. Maybe you can't stop for 1 minute just to wait on the blessing that God has for you. Maybe you desire and crave satisfaction so much that it has to be instant. That it has to be now. That it has to be in the very moment. These are all really fruits of the reason we settle for less. And we could say fear, we could say shame, we could say impatience, we could say just our nervousness, we could say embarrassment, we could say a lot of things. But the reason we're afraid, the reason we have shame, the reason we're impatient is much deeper than just fear, shame, and impatience. The reason we settle for less is ultimately because we think that the less we settle for is the best. Right? When you're afraid someone's going to attack you, and you make a decision based on that fear. You're making that decision because you believe that's what's going to save your life, or that's what's going to protect you. Right? If you're impatient, and you are doing something out of your impatience for the satisfaction of now, in this moment, well, the reason you do it is because you honestly believe this is what's going to satisfy me right now. Now, you may know in your head this isn't the best, but in your heart, in the pit of who you are, you believe this is the best for right now, or whatever the circumstance may be. But herein lies the problem in our belief, is that you've been deceived. Did you know that? Did you know that a lot of times when you settle for less, really it's out of deception? That's how it began in the Garden of Eden. That's how it began with Eve and the serpent. She was deceived. In Genesis chapter 3, when God comes along walking in the garden, God already knowing the mistake they've made, in chapter 3, it says, verse 12, we'll read chapter 3 instead of 2. Verse 12, it says, the man said, the woman who you gave to be with me, she gave me from the tree, and I ate. Then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this that you have done? And the woman said, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. This is the first account of man blaming it on woman. It didn't start with you. It was already happening. But this deception that Eve walked in and Adam walked in is the same deception we walk in today. Right? In believing that something is the best for you, you would be willing to wait for it. If you honestly believed that God was going to provide you a house tomorrow, would you buy a house today? No, you wouldn't. If you honestly believed that God was going to save you from a circumstance or a situation, you wouldn't try to save yourself today. Because you would be able to trust. You would be able to have faith. You would be able to rest in the hope that He's going to be there. But in this deception that we've been deceived in, it's changed everything we know about our life. It's changed how we perceive life. It's changed the things we perceive in life, love, relationships, values, belief systems. And it's taken all that in what God designed it and how God designed it, and it's flipped it on its head. It's totally flipped it. And so now we live our lives, instead of having an innate desire for the best, and to believe and to walk in the best, and to walk in the truth, and to walk in the light, we have this innate desire in nature that we walk in the darkness. Right? We walk in hiding, we walk in fear, we walk in shame. Like I said, there's a difference between knowing something and believing something. To know something is you just have informational awareness about it. You know it. In your head, you know it. But to believe something is much more than just knowing it. To believe it is to give up your ways for whatever the ways are that you're believing in. Right? You can know that there is a God. You can know that there is something out there. But that doesn't mean you believe in God. To believe in God is to give up your own ways of saying, I'm going to believe in myself and do things for myself and give my life to Him. There's a difference. So, in this deception, God's love got perverted. It got twisted. It got mangled. God's love is first, is selfless. God's love for us has nothing to do with the selfish desire that He has. It's out of His desire for us to be loved and to have relationship and to have life and to have peace. God's love is selfless. God's love is sacrificial, right? John chapter 15, verses 12 through 13. Surely you're already familiar with John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believeth in Him will not perish, but shall have everlasting life, right? The first act of God's love was really in giving His Son. You cannot associate love without some degree of giving. God loved, God gave. Selfishness does not give. John chapter 15, verse 12 says, This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one laid down his life for his friends. Greater love has no one than this, than you lay down your life for your friends. This delusion that we walk in, this deception we walk in, does not compel us to lay down our lives. It compels us to save our lives. Our sinful nature compels us to protect ourselves, to provide for ourselves. Right? No matter what it costs the other person. As long as I can live, I'll do it. As long as I can be provided for, I'll do it. As long as I can be safe. As long as I can have a title, I'll do whatever it takes. 1 John 3:16 tells us, We know love by this, that He laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. So how do you know love? It has to be by sacrifice. You cannot know what love is without experiencing what sacrifice is. You did not come to know the love of God without Him sacrificing Himself to show you that love. Right? We love Him because He first loved us. The love that you walk in and that you have partaken of as a Christian is only there because of His selfless act in laying down His life for you. Second thing about God's love is that as God's love not only requires selflessness and sacrifice, it requires freedom. Galatians chapter 5 verse 1 tells us that Christ set us free for freedom's sake. And He warns us, therefore, to keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. God set you free to be free, period. God did not set you free to enslave you to Himself. God did not set you free so that you could enslave yourself once again to the yoke of sin. God set you free so that you may know and experience what freedom is, but ultimately what love is. This was God's desire for you, was to be able to experience His love and be able to make a choice in freedom how you would respond. You have a choice and a decision you can make in your life. And that life is, what are you going to do with the freedom that God gives you? Are you going to run to sin? Are you going to run to selfish ambition? Are you going to run back to yourself? Or are you going to choose to respond in that love as He first acted towards you? To give up your life, to lay down your life for your brothers, to commit your life to Christ. So God's love is selfless, it's sacrificial, and it requires freedom. I cannot expect you to operate in love if I give you no freedom from which to do it. It's impossible. So, this deception, in our love, in our pride, in our selfishness, in our bondage, in our iniquity, in our sin, and in our fallen nature, we walk in deception. That deception is of God's love, of His kindness, of His mercy, of His sacrifice, and of His freedom. But this is what happens when we're deceived. When we are deceived, we live a life where everything we look at and everything we experience, we have a measure within ourselves by which we judge it. And that measure within ourselves, when we walk in deception, is wrong. So if you're deceived, right? Let's say I tell you a lie. If I tell you that Joshua killed someone, and you go to the police, and you tell them Joshua killed someone. Now you may fully believe that you're operating in truth, right? But because I have deceived you, or deceived Joshua, into believing that Joshua's killed someone, you go operating in what you think to be true and tell the police Joshua's killed someone, right? But you've actually measured the whole circumstance wrong just because you were deceived in the beginning. This is the same thing we do in every aspect of our life. Everything we judge, everything we measure our life by is wrong because we've been deceived. And that deception has changed our nature, it's changed how we view things, and then we end up walking in that deception and walking out the false reality in our lives. There's two areas I want to share with you in which this deception runs rampant, especially today, but not just today, it's been throughout all of humanity. Two areas that we face where our measure, where our judgment is wrong because we've been deceived. The first one is growth. If I was to ask you, what does growth look like? What would you tell me? How do you measure growth? If I was to come to your life and say, in the past 3 years, have you grown? How would you respond to me? What would be your measurement of growth? Would you tell me, well, I gained 10 pounds and 3 inches. I've grown. Would you tell me, well, I'm a little bit nicer, so I've grown? Would you tell me, well, I have more friends, I have a bigger house, I have a better job? How would you respond to growth? How would you determine what true growth is? Often, in our fallen nature, we look for signs, we look for wonders, we look for miracles, deeds, we look for the gifts of God, we look for what we have, what we possess, right? This is what the Jews did. The Jews demanded what? They demanded a sign. Because by having a sign, they could determine the authority that person walked in. So they came to Jesus and they said, Show us a sign. What sign do you give us? Right? Because their measure of growth, their measure was a sign. If you could show them a sign, they would say, okay, he's a little bit above just a normal person. Or he's a little bit more than just an ordinary person. Right? It says that the Greeks seek wisdom. The Greeks look for, what does he know? What is his knowledge? This is how they measured a man, right? In their wonderful culture, and all their beautiful aspects of their Greek life, if you knew something, if you were wise, they considered you to be something special. They considered you to be someone special. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, turn there with me if you would. The church of Corinth and Paul's writings to them illustrate these behaviors with detail beyond what I'm going to read tonight. But I just want to share with you a little bit. In chapter 1, as he opens his letter to the Corinthians, verse 4, he says, I thank my God always concerning you for the grace of God which was given you in Christ Jesus, that in everything you were enriched in Him, in all speech and all knowledge, even as the testimony concerning Christ was confirmed in you, so that you are not lacking in any gift, awaiting eagerly the revelation of our Lord Jesus Christ. So here's the people of Corinth, and he's saying to them, you guys come behind in no gift, right? You have all this speech, you have all this knowledge, you've been enriched. But then he goes on to tell them, oh, the Corinthian church, oh, the people at Corinth. In chapter 3, he says, verse 1, and I, brethren, could not speak to you as to spiritual men, but as to men of flesh, as to infants in Christ. If you were to look at the Corinthian church and judge them based on their signs and their wonders and their deeds and the gifts that they had, they would have been the most mature. They would have been the biggest. They would have been the baddest. They would have been the coolest. And you would have said, these people grow more than anyone. Yet Paul clearly says, I have to speak to you as infants in Christ, as men of flesh. I gave you milk to drink, not solid food, for you were not able to receive it. Indeed, even now you are not able, for you are still fleshly. For since there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not fleshly, and are you not walking like mere men? You see, when we judge growth by signs, by wonders, by miracles, by deeds, by gifts, by what we have, we walk into deception thinking we may be fully grown in having all the gifts and being able to perform signs and wonders, and yet we might still be an infant in Christ, still fleshly people, still mere men. This is just the havoc that this deception played on the church of Corinth. But Paul is going to explain to them what true growth and true maturity is. God measures growth and God measures maturity not by signs, not by wonders, not how many deeds you've done, not by what you have or the gifts that you have, but He measures growth and maturity by love. 1 Samuel 16 verse 7 says that man looks on the outward appearance, but that God looks at the heart. When God looks at your heart, you think He looks at how many gifts you have? You think He looks at your possessions? Do you think He looks at the signs you performed? No. He looks at the amount of love that you walk in. John chapter 13, verse 35. We are told that the disciples will be known by one thing. That the world will know that we are the Lord's disciples by one thing. By His love. And our love for one another. It's not by how many signs or wonders you perform, but it's by the amount of love of God that you have in your life and that you show to your brother. 1 John chapter 4, verses 16 through 19. Once again, speaking of love, it says, we have come to know love and have believed the love which God has for us. God is love, and the one who abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. By this, love is perfected with us, so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment, because as he is also, so also are we in this world. Are you afraid of God's judgment? Are you afraid that God's going to look at you and just slap you right upside the head? Sometimes I am. But the reality is, if we're truly afraid of God's judgment, the only answer we will be able to give is, do we abide in his love, and does his love abide in us? That's our only defense. Your signs and your wonders will not protect you from the judgment of God. Your deeds will not protect you. The gifts that God's given you will not protect you from the judgment of God. Only abiding in him. Let me give you this caution. In Matthew 24:24, it says that many false Christs and many false prophets will deceive you by signs and wonders and miracles. If you measure growth and maturity by signs and wonders and miracles, you're probably going to end up being deceived. Back to Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, chapter of love. Paul concludes the first letter he sends to them with chapters 13 and 14 about love and the excellency of love. He says, if I speak with tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy, if I know all mysteries, all knowledge, if I have all faith, so as to move mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. God's measure of growth and maturity is love. Without love, you are nothing. You're nothing. I don't care if you have money. I don't care if you do good things for people. I don't care even if you have the gifts of God. If you have not love, you are nothing. It's a stark reality and a stark contrast to the measure that we measure people by. The second thing is identity. How do you measure your identity? How do you gauge what your identity is supposed to be? How do you judge who you're supposed to be? Identity. I'm going to share something with you that may sound confusing here at first, but hang with me and I'll explain it. That statement is this: we strive to be angels. We strive to be angels. Sounds a little crazy, right? But let me ask you this question. If an angel of God was to walk in the door, in person, in the natural, physical realm, how many of you guys would be amazed and just, oh my gosh, what is this, right? All of us probably would. We might fall down on our knees. We might just be in awe, right? But how many of us would respond if just a son of God walked through the door? You probably just look at him. Hi, what's your name? How are you? Nice to meet you. Welcome to the church. Right? And so this idea of striving to be angels, what do I mean by this? In the book of Hebrews, chapter 1, we've been studying the book of Hebrews, and I've been doing some further study on my own time, just in going through each of these verses and kind of explaining what God means. And God showed me that this idea of striving to be angels, of striving to be an angel, really means simply that in this deception we walk in, there is a desire really just to be the messenger of God instead of the Son of God. And in Hebrews chapter 1, he paints a beautiful picture of the huge gap between sonship and being an angel. Now let me explain to you what an angel is so that you're not confused. An angel is simply a messenger of God, a ministering spirit sent to serve the heirs of salvation. An angel does not necessarily have to be a divine heavenly being that sparkles and glows in glory and has a halo or wings or whatever they have. An angel can simply be a messenger of God. There can be a human angel. There can be a heavenly angel. But this identity that we strive for, especially as Christians, we still look to be angels, to be messengers of God. I want to know what God's saying so that I can just tell people what God's saying. I want to be God's messenger, right? I want to run around and pray for people and do this sign and do this wonder and heal this person so that they'll know God. And angels are really cool. In Psalm 103, it tells us what the angels do. We know that they render service to those who inherit salvation. But listen to this. Psalm 103. It tells us that these angels, verse 20, it says, "Bless the Lord, you His angels. Angels are mighty in strength, who perform His word, obeying the voice of His word. Bless the Lord, all you His host, who serve Him, doing His will." How many times have we cried out, "God, just give us strength. We want to do your will. We want to do what you're saying to us," right? We want to be that messenger, or we want to be that vessel, or we want to be this for you, just to fulfill your will. That's wonderful, and that's great, and that's really awesome. And when a messenger of God comes along and shares the word of the Lord with you, it's encouraging, it's exciting, and it can bring drastic change in our lives. But if we're striving just to be a messenger of God, we're falling short of what God really has for us. In the book of Revelation, there's angels all over the place, right? It's the angels who blow the trumpets. It's the angels who are the angel of the church, right? It's the angels who pour out the bowls of judgment and wrath. This idea of angels being glorious heavenly figures, we love it. Right? Y'all remember that TV show, Touched by an Angel? Why do you want to be touched by an angel? An angel is just a servant of God, sent to serve the children of God and the sons of God. I want to be touched by God. I want to be touched by a son of God. Angels are great. But every time in the Old Testament, or maybe not every time, but a lot of times when an angel showed up, you were scared. You were afraid. You lost your strength. But we still strive to be these messengers of God. Because we have a deception that being a messenger of God and just fulfilling His will and just performing His word is all that He has for us. And He does want us to fulfill His word, or fulfill His will and walk out in His word, what He has for our lives. But He has so much more than that. He calls us to be sons. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 18, we're warned about the worship of angels. He says, "Do not be carried away or deceived by those who give value to the worship of angels." And in the book of Revelation, chapter 22, after it's talked about all these angels and all that they do, verse 8, even John, who wrote the book of Revelation, says, "I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. And when I heard and saw, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who showed me these things. But he said to me, 'Do not do that. I am a fellow servant of yours and of your brethren the prophets and of those who heed the words of this book. Worship God.'" Even John the Apostle fell into this idea of worshiping an angel, of worshiping someone who can deliver the word of the Lord, who can fulfill the will of the Lord. But he says, don't do that. Worship God. God calls you and I to be His sons. And in Hebrews chapter 1, He doesn't beat up on angels, but He doesn't always give them the best that He has for His sons. Angels can do wonderful things. They're mighty beings, right? They have strength. They can fly around the cosmos, or however they travel. Right? They can move so quickly. If you watched angels in the outfield, they can make you jump so you can catch that ball. Right? That little kid standing there, the angels are here, the angels are here. But God tells us in the book of Hebrews that there's something better than the angels, and that something better than the angels, and that something better for our identity is not just to be a messenger, is not just to be a servant, but is to be a son. Verse 4, it says, having become as much better than the angels, talking about the Son, as He has inherited a more excellent name than they. For which of the angels did He ever say, you are my Son, today I have begotten you, and again I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. The promise that God gives to a son, He does not give to an angel. If you want to serve God, you can serve God. If you want to follow His will, you can follow His will. But if all you do is serve Him and walk out His will, just know that God has a lot better for you. He has a best for you, and that best is to be a son. He's not going to tell these messengers, hey, I have a promise for you to be a son. I'm going to beget you. I will father you. Verse 6, he says, and when again He brings the firstborn into the world, He says, let all the angels of God worship Him. This idea of being a messenger of God will have to give reverence to those who are the sons of God. Right? Even though you may deliver the message of God or carry out His word or His will, that will always be subject to the sonship that you have in God. Right? Let's keep going. Verse 7, of the angels He says, who makes His angels winds and His ministers a flame of fire. That sounds pretty cool. I'd love to be a wind sometime and a flame of fire, right? What if I walked in here and just, here I am, flame of fire, right? You'd probably look at me like, dude, this dude's got God. We better listen to him, right? But if I come to you as a son and say, hey, you may not want to do that, you know, that's deception. I'll think about that. I'll pray. Thank you, man. I appreciate that, right? But if I'm a flame of fire, whoa, you're on another level, right? I'm going to really listen now. But of the Son, He says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the righteous scepter is the scepter of His kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your companions. And you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. And they all will become old like a garment, and like a mantle you will roll them up. Like a garment they will also be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not come to an end. But to which of the angels has He ever said, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet? You know, one of the best things about being a son of God is that we can rest. That we can sit down and allow God to make our enemies a footstool for our feet. If you're a messenger of God, that can be great. But the messenger of God doesn't get to sit on the throne, doesn't get to sit in a place of rest and allow God to bring those enemies under our feet. Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to render service for the sake of those who inherit salvation? Angels are wonderful. Angels are great. Messengers are wonderful. But too often, even in the church, we look to the messenger rather to the Son, right? How many times we look at a great pastor, oh man, that dude's on fire for God. He's serving God, man. He did 3 mission trips this year. He was gone for 6 months. They had 23, healings. They had 500 salvations. This is great. This is awesome, right? And being a messenger of God, those are wonderful things. But God gives the promise of sonship and to father those sons, not to the angels, not to the messengers, right? I know many Christians who have served the Lord and have done His will and said, I want to do more for God. And they do, and they do, and they do. And they get tired, and they get weary. And they get burnt out. And they say, let me go on vacation. Or they make a mistake, and they fall into sin or into a trap. Because God did not design us to constantly run, to constantly go, as He did the angels. Angels don't have to rest. The angels don't have to sleep. The angels can just appear right here, right? We got to walk. We got to run. We got to fly. We got to get in a car. God calls us to rest. The amount of work that we do thinking it's the will of God, a lot of times is because we're striving for our identity that can be good, but isn't the best. Once again, settling for less. Our identity and our growth. How do we measure those things? In your life, do you strive to be a messenger of God, or do you strive to be a son of God and to walk in the rest of God and in the kingship that God has for you, in the priesthood that God has for you? When you look at your life, do you measure growth, not just in your life, but in the lives of others, as what they have, what they look like, what they can do, the signs and wonders they perform? This is a reality we all need to face as Christians, is that we've been deceived. That's the reason Jesus came. When Jesus gave up His life for us, sacrificed Himself for us, what does He do for us when we receive that sacrifice? When we receive Him as Lord of our lives? When we receive His blood and His body? He starts to deal with that deception that took place with Eve, right? The first thing He does is He gives us a new nature. He removes that sinful nature. This is the only way to deal with the deception that we walk in as humans, is to receive Christ, is to receive His resurrection, to receive His death, to receive His cross, His blood, and His body. That's the only way to deal with that deception. Jesus Christ gives you a new nature. Jesus Christ loves you. Jesus Christ sets you free. He shows you how to lay down your life and how to walk in humility. Right? The deception you walk in is pride, is arrogance. I wonder God so many times calls us to lay down our lives, to be humble, right? If you look throughout all of Scripture, the men of God, when they made a mistake, they did not make a mistake because they were humble. They made a mistake because they thought they were strong and they thought they knew how to measure what God wanted to do. And they acted upon their own thoughts, their own desires, their own ideas. God has called you to walk in the light. God has called you out of that deception that you walk in. In my life, I've settled for less in a lot of things. And I've recognized that. And God's been dealing with me. And I'm thankful. Is it hard? Yes. It's hard to have to admit that for the past however many years of my life, I have settled for something less than what God had for me. It's going to be hard to admit that you've been messing it up. It's hard to be humble. It's hard to give up your life. And a lot of times, you're not going to hear people who want to appease you say, hey man, give up your life. Give up what you want. Give up your desires. Lay down your life for someone else to walk in love. It's hard to be humble, but humility is the key to receiving what God has for us. You have to acknowledge you cannot do it. You are not strong enough. Your ways are not bulletproof. They are not foolproof. Your ways are foolish. And God will use that foolishness to confound you and to confound the wise. Be humble. Acknowledge you don't have the answer. Right? And don't judge your neighbor and your brethren in that deception. Don't look around and think, man, look at him. He ain't been doing no signs. I don't see no wonders in his life. He may be farther along than you are. Right? Don't judge someone because they can do this miracle or they have this gift. Right? We're supposed to pursue love. Paul tells us to pursue love. He does say, hey, desire the gift of prophecy. Desire the gifts of God. But he says pursue love. If you start pursuing the gifts, pursuing the signs and the wonders, if you start pursuing, man, I'm going to fulfill the will of God. I'm going to be a messenger of God. And you forget about your sonship, and you forget about pursuing love, you're going to get burnt out. You're going to fall into the traps and the schemes of the enemy. You're going to be walking in your own iniquity. I want to conclude with this thought. Once again, how much of your life have you settled for less? How much of your life, if you were to look at it, would you say, I am in this position because I settled for something less than what God had for me? Your problems, your tribulations, your pains are not caused by God. Your tribulations and your pains and your sufferings are due to the problems within your own life. You can't blame your neighbor for the problems you have. You can't blame God for the problems you have. Well, I guess you can blame them, but they're not going to be held accountable for it. They're not going to be responsible for it. You are responsible and accountable before God to deal with the deception in your own life. But know that the tribulations and the pain and the suffering that you face today, God is using to reveal the reality of His love in your life. If you're hurting, if you're lonely, God's using that. If you're confused, if you don't know what to do, if you're anxious, God's using that. It's okay to be in a position where you don't know what to do. It's okay to be hurting. It's okay to be confused. Know that God's going to use that to show you what He has for you. The reason we settle for less is we're deceived. God doesn't want us to be deceived. That's the reason He came. That's the reason He died. That's the reason He sacrificed His life for us. And I want to pray for you tonight that if you've been walking in that deception, this is an opportunity, not the only opportunity, but this is an opportunity for you to say, hey, you know what? I've been walking in some deception. And I'm tired of walking like I've been walking. I am tired for settling for less because I thought that was the best. The women, the drugs are not going to satisfy you, right? Being in control is not going to satisfy you. Having all knowledge is not going to satisfy you. Just knowing the answer is not going to satisfy you. I've had hundreds of people come to me and say, if God would just tell me exactly what He wants me to do, I would do it and we would all be happy. The reality is, that's not true. Because God has told you what He wants you to do. He wants you to be righteous. He wants you to have a relationship with Him. Right? We mess it up every single day. Every single day. If God came to us and said, do this, this, and this, guess what? We would be missing out on the point of our relationship with God, which is to be a son in relationship with Him, with our Father. Please bow your heads. Close your eyes.